To his grace, Prince Villon, Toreador Sovereign of Paris. Though I know well the weight you bear, and the sharpness of your hours, I write to you not out of panic, but in recognition that the world is turning beneath our feet. I fear that what began as a whisper has become a rending, and that the silence left by Mithras vanishing is not merely absence, it is rot. There is no center in England now, only competing claims and fragmentation. A land that once stood as a bastion of our kind, ancient, cold, and cruel, now teeters on the edge of hysteria. The disappearance of Amelia, London's Toreador Primogen, was the first crack I could measure. That a woman so ensconced in prestige and power could vanish without explanation, and that those responsible could be tied to that grotesque blackmailer, Madame Filth, spoke to a domain already unraveling. Even now, the Camarilla acts as if this is an internal matter, but it isn't. These acts are not isolated, they are symptoms. The infection runs deeper than London's court can admit. You once told me that every city without a master soon imagines itself free. I fear England is not imagining, it is convulsing. With Mithras gone, the island has become a house of locked rooms, every one of them echoing with ancient debts and older sins, grievances, long-lasting blood feuds. But this moment, this chaos, has led me to reflect upon other nights, when the Kindred played at being sovereigns, not just of cities, but of entire civilizations. Scholars we keep close, the true ones, not the sycophants, have whispered to me of a land older than Carthage, older than Rome, a place where Kindred ruled not from behind the throne, but from it. I speak of Egypt. There they say the myths are not metaphors, a chronicle of damned kings and blood gods who carved law and worship from the jugular of a continent. If Mithras was a god to some, then what were these beings who had no need to pretend? And so, with your permission, I offer this accounting of myths and of legacies, of those kindred who shaped not just cities, but cosmologies. Let us look to Egypt for warning of what may happen when kindred gods rise and fall. When we speak of ancient kindred, we often imagine dust and bone, torpid things locked beneath the earth, dreaming of relevance. But Egypt is different. Long before Rome bled into Gaul, before Carthage was salted into silence, there was Kemet, black land, red crown, and blood that ruled as divinity. The kindred there did not whisper from shadows. They strode through temples. They were worshipped in gold and alabaster, fed by priests who dared not speak their names above a hush. It is no myth, my lord. The gods of that place were not gods at all, but of our kind. And, it can be said, perhaps other supernatural beings as well. Vampires exalted beyond recognition in the case of the kindred. They ruled cities that rivaled Alexandria in glory, commanding cults, crafting rites, and bending nations to their will. And unlike so many of the other old ones, whose names are whispered but whose movements are theory, these ancients left marks. Temples aligned to stars, tombs cursed in forgotten tongues, bloodlines warped by forgotten pacts. What's most terrifying is not that these vampires reigned openly, but that they disappeared without a trace save for whispers and wreckage. How does one erase a god? The same way, perhaps, one erases a prince. Let me begin with the one we know best, though I hesitate, for Set is known only in the way a shadow is known, by what it obscures. Set, Sutek, Lord of Storms, Master of the Duat. He had more aliases than I have paper to fit them, which foreshadows the criminality of the clan that bears his name. Set didn't simply rule in Egypt. He was its betrayer and guardian, destroyer and deity. His worship was not simply some metaphor. His name was carved into stone. His cults ran temples. His image stood beside pharaohs. In some cities, he was beloved. In others, feared. Always obeyed. But the Egyptians did not merely fear Set. They built their cities on the bones of his worship. His name was a talisman, spoken in reverence and dread, and his cults took root long before Rome ever dreamed of conquest. He wasn't an intruder in their pantheon. He was a sovereign, and unlike so many deities conjured from mortal superstition, Set walked among his followers. His temples were not for worship alone. They were fortresses, feeding grounds, and laboratories of spiritual corruption. Recently, a captured Nosferatu nautist told me that Set was one of the fabled antediluvians, though I can't speak to that. The existence of the followers of Set would suggest it, but even that has become complicated. Another nautist, captured recently in the raid in Marseille, told me that Set, in fact, came to lead this clan rather than found it. That the followers of Set were once known as the Snake Clan, this story goes. It's impossible to know the truth about these things, being they are so ancient, but I can't imagine both possibilities. Dangerous scholars who study such forbidden topics tell me of the Black Land, where the river's flood marked life's rhythm. But in the shadows beyond the grain and lotus, Set's children made their own Nile, a current of vice, secrets, and blood. They called him the Great Serpent, the Typhon, Master of the Duat, Lord of Storms, and in truth, he was both kindred and something more. They say he warred with Osiris for control of mortal thrones and for the soul of the land itself. Where Osiris brought order, Set sowed revelation. He whispered to kings and priests alike, pulling back the illusions of what they called the Ma'at, and offering them something older, raw, more real. Freedom through self-deification, power without shame. The struggle between those two vampire gods was made more complicated by the rumor that they were, in fact, at one point, brothers. After a dynastic struggle leading to the death of their parents, Set, while mortal, was banished from Egypt, and Osiris remained to become heir apparent to the throne. Set's exile led him to the lands of the Levant and Assyria, where he would become a kindred of great power. He would return to Egypt to secure his legacy. He didn't need armies. Those could be found easily enough. He had cults, snake-handling priests in lacquered red, eunuch scribes who bled prophecy into scrolls. He taught them secrets no man should know, and demanded sacrifice in return. These were not parasites on Egyptian society, they were part of its architecture. In Thebes, in Memphis, even Heliopolis, his agents held power behind the throne, advising pharaohs whose names are now eroded from stone. His victory over Osiris would pave the way for the Setite domination over Egypt for thousands of years, until the Islamic conquests would lead to new challenges from the Ashira and Banu Hakim. And when the mortal empires fell, his doctrine endured as a virus of the soul. A world where the kindred did not hide, a world where one vampire, through terror and charisma, could dance as a god and be welcomed with open arms. To speak of Set without invoking Osiris would be a disservice. Osiris, called the Resurrected King, was not a myth draped in grain and emerald iconography. Among certain circles of Kindred lore masters, there is a quiet certainty that he was one of us. Again, not a metaphor, not an inspiration, but in cold, crimson reality. As the story goes, he was born of Geb and Nut, being the older brother of Set. They lived on the Nile of Egypt under the rule of their grandfather Ra, who was a king of the land. The rumor goes that Ra killed the parents of Osiris and Set, angered that they had had more children than he had permitted, thus threatening clear dynastic succession. Before Ra could solve the problem completely, Set would adopt the first of his aliases and travel as Sutek beyond the lands of the Nile into the Levant. Meanwhile, Osiris remained, and upon the death of his grandfather, assumed the throne of Egypt. He would marry his sister Isis, and the two would have a son named Horus. It is not believed by most that either Isis or Horus were kindred, but they did have some sort of supernatural nature. What that nature might have been is unknown to the scholars I spoke with. During this time, a mysterious being would come to the court of Osiris, calling himself the Typhon. Some Nanas speculate that this was the oldest member of the Lazombra clan, while others suggest it may have been the first of the Bruja bloodline. In any case, there is no doubt that he was a kindred. The Typhon would visit Osiris over 4 nights, each night telling him a prophecy of what horrors would come to Egypt. On the final night, he embraced the Egyptian king. It is interesting that some followers of Set refer to their own god as the Typhon, but this is clearly not the implication of this story. It is possible that this was a title for something at the time, though its purpose has been lost to us. They say Osiris sought to reform what Set had corrupted, where Set offered truth through subjugation. Osiris promised redemption through discipline. In this he was not weak, but principled. His children, yes, they existed, and they still call themselves so, turned instead to a path of spiritual purification. They called themselves the children of Osiris, and they sought to purge the beast not through submission or indulgence, but through willpower. I spoke with a Ventru that claims to have met one long ago. If even a tenth of what he claimed was true, then Osiris was not simply rebelling against kindred tradition. He was a philosopher king who walked willingly into undeath to reshape the nature of it. This would make him not only Set's rival, but his counterpart, a Canaanite of immense age and vision who turned the practices of blood magic toward transcendence. When Set returned to Egypt, he warred against his brother Osiris, eventually tricking the servants of his brother into locking Osiris into a golden sarcophagus. It is said Osiris was torn apart, literally, by Set, his body scattered in 14 pieces across Egypt. But like all great monsters and martyrs, he rose again. Not through mortal rites, but through the devotion of those who believed in his resurrection, and through the efforts of Isis and Horus, using the knowledge of a mysterious being known as Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, knowledge, and magic. Upon his resurrection, he was no longer simply a kindred, though he still had powers of the blood, such as healing and disciplines. He would become known as the Resurrected King. And after the battle between Set and Osiris, the Resurrected King would descend to the underworld and become one of the great kings of the dead. The children of Osiris endure even now, though they are fractured, hunted, and few. The Setites despise them with theological venom. And for me, that alone lends credibility. One does not waste centuries hunting shadows unless the shadow once held a blade. In the dusts of Egypt, then, we find what may have been one of the earliest great ideological wars between kindred. Not prince against prince, but God against God, each commanding cults, philosophies, and bloodlines that echo into our nights even now. There are few figures in Egyptian legend who so perfectly straddle the boundary between myth and blood as Wadjet. Known to mortals as a protective goddess, the Uraeus serpent, which rests on the brow of pharaohs, Wadjet was said to have been the matron and protector of Lower Egypt in her cobra form, and upon unification with her sister Nekhbet, goddess of Upper Egypt, the joint protector and patron of all Egypt. Among our kind, she is remembered with a different reverence. In nights long past, the name Wadjet may have belonged to a kindred of profound age and power, a vampire whose form blurred the line between woman and serpent. Her blood carried venom, and whenever the Red Land swallowed empires, her influence slithered through the cracks. Some claim she was a guardian of Set's domains, or even a devotee of Isis herself before their allegiances shattered. Others say she walked her own path, serving no temple, but protecting sacred places of old, groves, tombs. If this is true, Wadjet was said to have been embraced by Set and seduced by him. But it is possible her loyalty eventually went to Osiris and Isis. It is said that Wadjet protected Isis and Horus as they fled from Set following the death of Osiris. The truth is buried in the sands surrounding the Nile, mostly because whatever Wadjet did in this moment so enraged Set that his followers have spent centuries purging Wadjet from recorded history, though it is rumored that the children of Osiris maintain some memory of her. What is known, or at least whispered, is that she endured. Even when the pharaohs fell and temples crumbled, even when the children of Set were scattered to the edges of the world, some elders claimed they still dreamed of her. A coiling shape in the desert night, eyes burning with secrets too ancient to name. Not quite a deity, not merely a vampire. A warning, perhaps, that some gods did not need worship to endure, only hunger and patience. Some of the Camarilla scholars whisper of older horrors and legends, far more tangible. Among them, there is one name that haunts every excavation report: Wepwawet, the opener of ways. Unlike ephemeral mythological figures, he is said to be a Sothic eternal, a follower of Set who has lived through an entire Sothic cycle of the old Egyptian civil calendar, meaning exactly 1,460 solar years. This is the age a vampire is typically considered a Methuselah, though at this point, naturally, Wepwawet is substantially older than 1,400 years. These Eternals are revered as demigods by the followers of Set. Their words have the authority of the Lord of Storms himself. An Eternal is counted as a direct childer of Set, regardless of his actual lineage, although the Setites explain that this is more of a metaphor to explain their exalted state. To the common mortal, he remained a god, worshipped in tombs and temples where priests light lamps before his jackal-faced visage. But among the Setites and the more occult-minded of our kind, Wepwawet is recognized as the progenitor of the warrior Setites, in particular the cohort of Wepwawet, a warrior cult devoted to Set, comprised of the most disciplined and lethal soldier Setites. Those warriors venerate Wepwawet not merely as a symbol, but as a spiritual leader. He is their eternal exemplar, their sire in purpose and in ritual. It is said that the cohort received its name in homage to his ancient campaigns. The silent marches at dusk, the splitting of enemy paths, the opening of ways through blood and bone. These warrior Setites bind themselves to his legacy, following a martial code older than any Camarilla oath. The same cult influence echoes centuries later. In the subterranean ruins beneath Cairo and Luxor, where modern archaeologists speak of coffins sealed not by mortal hands, but of kindred wards of unknown ancient origin. The Sothic Eternals, among whom Wepwawet stands supreme, are rumored to still convene in shadows and in dreams. Some claim that beyond the Nile, beneath undisturbed burial mounds, the Opener of Ways watches as kindred armies march even now on distant battlefields. I have heard whispers that his cult operates even within London's expat North African communities, though I cannot confirm if these are more fiction than fact. Yet it is here that the importance becomes clear. Every time we hear of inexplicable vampiric violence, a sudden uprising, a battle fought with eerie coordination, that is not the beast alone. That is Wepwawet's dream, his silent opening of ways. Nephthys, too, walked the black sands of Egypt as more than myth. Though mortals revere her as a goddess of mourning and protection, we know her as something older, colder, and more cursed. She was rumored to have been a family relation to moon beasts of Egypt, a group of barbarians calling themselves silent striders, bound by blood, but not the gift of their beast. In that distant dawn, she fought beside Horus against the depredations of Set, aiding in the resurrection of Osiris and forging a fragile pact between these moon beasts and the cult of Isis, the wife of Osiris. It was Nephthys who opened the way for that alliance, a feat remembered even in the hidden histories passed between their barbaric moon beast elders and kindred historians alike. But fate is not kind to those who would hover too close to divinity. Eventually, Set came to her, not with blades, but with eternity in his voice. He offered her the embrace, and she accepted. Whether it was out of love, despair, or some deeper hunger, none can say. When she rose as kindred, Nephthys turned on her former allies and sought to seduce Horus to undeath. He refused her. He tore her to pieces in battle, but that did not end her story. Because Set had removed her heart, using the gift of Serpentis before her death, she could not pass into the underworld complete. She could not be judged by Ma'at. She became one of the undying, a soul unable to pass on, cut off from the spirit world due to some strangeness in her blood as a descendant of moonbeasts. And so she became something else, Bound to Set, yes, but also exiled from him. Neither goddess nor ghost. Not wholly a priestess, not merely a monster. Some say she still lingers, awaiting a dark rite to engage her rebirth. Not as Nephthys of the Mourning Veil, but as a creature fully touched by evil, transcending her cursed half-life into something far more dreadful. But if the gods of Egypt walked amongst men, then Nephthys, torn from the spirits of her ancestors and the grace of her gods, did so in exile, in agony, and perhaps in the cruelest shadow of all love betrayed. Her curse is more than undeath. It is to remember what she once was and what she can never be again. Sobek is one of the oldest terrors whispered about in the deeper cults of Set. Something made into a vampire by Set himself. The legends claim Sobek was once a reptilian moon beast, one of the shapeshifters who carried ancestral memory deep in their blood. He was not born in darkness, but dragged into it through a ritual embrace that severed him from the light of Helios and bound him to undeath. The followers of Set do not speak of this lightly. To them, Sobek is not just a figure of awe, but of dread. If the stories are true, he is a fourth-generation Methuselah, an abomination that violates the laws of both Kindred and the Moon Beasts. Where others seek to corrupt from within, Sobek was forged to break the world, an act of heresy and violence. He is not known for politics or subtle influence. His role was to destroy, to devour. His last known resting place is said to be a submerged temple in the region of Fayum, guarded by ghouled crocodiles and occult traps lost to time. Some Setites believe that one of these creatures speaks on his behalf, an ancient beast that relays visions and warnings in the crocodile lord's name. They call it Abdal Sobek, and it has become a prophetic figure within the cult. Abdal al-Sobek is rumored to be over 1,000 years old. No known kindred has encountered Sobek and returned. The rituals that bind his name to Set's legacy persist. His memory is preserved not in temples, but in the fear of those who still offer him blood. Whether he sleeps or watches, none can say. But among those who trace their lineage to Set, the name Sobek is never invoked without purpose and a small amount of fear. The motive of Set to create this abomination are tied to the story of Osiris once again. While Sobek still walked with the reptilian moon beasts, he allied himself with the vampire goddess Wadjet to protect Isis and her son Horus as they fled Set's wrath. When Set found them and took both Isis and Horus as captives, he spared special vengeance for Sobek. In general, the reptilian moon beasts are usually immune to the embrace. However, with the power and potency of Set's blood, he was able to overcome this limitation through the use of advanced rituals. Sobek is most likely the only reptilian moon beast abomination in the world. And so, my prince, the sands of Egypt conceal more than the bones of empires. They bury the footsteps of gods who bled, ruled, and devoured his kindred. Whether Sobek still slumbers between Fayum, whether Nephthys curse yet poisons the wind, or whether the children of Osiris still chant in lost catacombs beneath Cairo, I cannot say. But what I have gathered, I place before you as one might lay relics at a shrine. Fragments of divinity reshaped by the embrace, You once told me that history is destiny. If that is true, then the gods of the Nile were not myths but omens. Warnings in flesh, warnings we have ignored for too long. These old powers are not all dead, my lord. They have simply learned patience, and in the wake of Mithras' disappearance, I wonder if they are stirring again, testing the locks of their tombs. If Paris is the heart of culture, then Egypt is the bone of memory, and we, dear prince, are in the dark. There are forces moving beneath the dust, forces that once wore crowns of sunlight and now feast in shadow. As ever, I remain your servant. Alexander Yates, Sheriff of Paris, July 1945.